My name's Jack, and I serve in the U.S. Navy. I'm a tall, athletic guy, 23 years old, and I don't mess around with smoking or drinking. Lately, I've been getting this itch to settle down and start a family, a real American Christian family. Maybe it's the military life, maybe it's just getting older. But the idea of coming home to a wife and kids, and maybe a dog, feels like something I really want. I can picture it. A cozy house in Texas, Sunday barbecues, the works. Yeah, call me old-fashioned or whatever, but that's my dream. So I decided to jump on Tinder because, honestly, where the hell else do people meet nowadays? I uploaded a decent photo, talked a bit about my Navy gig, my clean habits, and my family aspirations. I started swiping and came across 3 girls who seemed like a good fit, but one stood out, Victoria. She was the sexy blonde from England, with a big chest and a gentle demeanor that just pulled me in. She had this delicate way about her that made me think she was the kind of girl you bring home to your mom. Now, let me be clear. I'm not the kind of guy who's just out for a quick fuck. When I saw Victoria, I wasn't picturing a night in the sack. I was thinking about introducing her to my folks back in Texas. Yeah, I know, it sounds pretty damn sweet and proper. But that's just who I am. It's not about how I was raised. It's just my nature. Maybe that's why I've had a hard time finding the right girl. I'm looking for someone to share a life with, not just a bed. Victoria and I started getting to know each other through texts and calls whenever I had service or internet. She didn't seem to mind that I was a soldier, which was a relief. We had some pretty romantic moments, even with the distance. Like, there was this one night we stayed up late, talking about our dreams and plans. She told me about her childhood in England, how she missed the rolling green hills and old brick houses. I shared stories of Texas sunsets and my time on the ranch. It felt like we were building something real, despite the miles between us. Another time, I sent her a care package from one of my deployments. It had some local trinkets, a handwritten letter, and a small piece of my old Navy uniform. She sent me a video of her opening it, and seeing her smile, hearing her laugh, it was like I was right there with her. Those moments made all the waiting worth it. Then came the day we finally planned to meet. She lived not far from the military base where I was stationed, and I often visited the nearby town. So when I got some time off, I immediately took a car and drove to see her. Man, when I saw her for the first time, it was like one of those moments from a dream, where everything feels just right. She was gorgeous, and I felt this rush of excitement and nerves all at once. Our first meeting was filled with those awkward pauses, but it was perfect in its own way. I'll never forget the way she looked, the way she smiled, like she was happy to see me, genuinely happy. We went to a nice restaurant and talked a lot. I remember when I drove her home, we took a short walk from the car, and that's when we had our first kiss. It was magical, you know? That feeling of being in love. I couldn't sleep that night, only thinking about her. And when I did sleep, she was in my dreams. Days turned into weeks, and on our 3rd date, we finally slept together. That night, I went to pick her up, and her parents wanted to meet me. They were this typical upper-class English couple, and they seemed all right at first. But then they hit me with the, "So what do you do for work?" And when I said, "I'm in the U.S. Navy," their expressions turned cold. Her dad said something like, "Oh, so you kill people for a living?" It was like a punch to the gut. Here I was, thinking I might have a future with this girl, and her parents were judging me for serving my country. I grew up in a family that always supported my decision to serve America, and suddenly, I was this monster in their eyes. I mean, what the fuck? What country can exist without an army? It pissed me off. And it wasn't just that one comment. Her mom would make these snide remarks about my American ways and how they weren't quite what they envisioned for their daughter. Every time I visited, I felt like I was under a microscope, and no matter what I did, I wasn't good enough. One time I brought Victoria some flowers just because. Her mom looked at them and said, "Oh, that's sweet. In England, we prefer more thought-out gifts." Another time I offered to help her dad fix a leaky faucet, trying to be helpful, you know? He just brushed me off, saying, "We usually hire professionals for that." It was like nothing I did could win them over. And yet, I stuck around because of Victoria. She was worth it, every bit of bullshit I had to deal with from her parents. She made me believe we had a future together, despite everything. I started to imagine what it would be like if we moved back to Texas, if she could see my home, meet my folks, and understand where I come from. Maybe then she'd get why I am the way I am. It might seem like I'm putting England in a bad light, but no, don't even think about that. I love this country. It's wonderful. Yes, it's the land of my ancestors, albeit distant ones, but still. It does bother me a bit that England is turning into a Muslim country. It's practically going to be the first Muslim country with nuclear weapons soon. Just kidding, or not. Anyway, I love this country and its people. The English are amazing, and Harry Potter is the best Christmas movie. There's something about those old brick buildings, the history seeping from every corner, and the damn politeness that makes you feel like you're in a different world. The pubs, the fish and chips, the way they say cheers for everything, it's all fantastic. So, Victoria and I started renting an apartment together, and then I got the news that I'd be transferred. I have a good relationship with my superiors, and they transferred me to Texas. Yes, I was very lucky. So we flew to Texas, and I introduced my family to my girlfriend. My folks loved her. Mom was all over her, saying how she'd always wanted a daughter, and Dad couldn't stop talking about how he'd finally have someone to pass down his barbecue secrets to. It was perfect. We lived month by month, and then Victoria got pregnant. I was over the moon to find out it was going to be a boy. I pictured him running around the yard, learning to fish with Grandpa, and going to ball games with me. We started picking out names and talking about the nursery, and it felt like everything was falling into place. I could already see our little family, all smiles and happiness. Then I got transferred again, but this time very far away. Victoria decided to move back to her parents in England while I was away. Shortly before I left, we got married. I proposed to her in Las Vegas. We had a beautiful and very touching wedding. It was one of those quickie chapel weddings with an Elvis impersonator and everything. But it was perfect. She wore this simple white dress, and I had on my navy blues. We looked ridiculous and happy, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. So she moved to England, and I moved far away. After being away for 2 months, I decided to surprise her. I arrived at her parents' house, walked in quietly since the door was open, went to her room, and found her sleeping in bed with some guy. My heart fucking stopped. There she was, my pregnant wife, curled up with another dude. This guy was sleeping in some kind of fancy suit. I grabbed him by that suit and lifted him. He almost crapped his pants. He cursed in a funny British accent. Let's just say I made him regret sleeping in so late. He ran off and my wife Victoria chased after him. By the way, she was already 4 months pregnant. The whole scene was like something out of a bad movie, with her shouting and him stumbling out of the house, half-dressed and terrified. To skip ahead, this was some rich guy who went to school with my wife. His father knew Victoria's father well. Her parents wanted them to be together, but Victoria didn't know what to choose. After some time, he pursued her more aggressively, and she gave in to him. But the most interesting part is still ahead. I went downstairs, sat in a chair, and just waited. I didn't know, maybe it was her brother or something. I couldn't even imagine such a scenario in my worst nightmare. 3 days ago, we were talking about how much we missed each other, and now this. Then the conflict started, and her parents got involved. Her father came storming in, red-faced and furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted. I stayed calm, my training kicking in. "Asking my wife why she's in bed with another man," I replied coldly. He came at me, fists clenched. Without thinking, I headbutted him, breaking his nose. Blood splattered everywhere, and he dropped like a sack of potatoes. Victoria's mother screamed, and the room erupted into chaos. Her father was on the floor, clutching his face. Victoria was sobbing, and her mother was yelling at me, calling me a monster. It was a fucking nightmare. I tried to explain myself, but no one was listening. I was the bad guy, the American brute who had hurt their precious family. Victoria tried to defend me, saying it was all a misunderstanding, but it was too late. The damage was done. Her parents were never going to accept me, and now I had assaulted her father. It felt like the walls were closing in, and there was no way out. I wish I could tell you it got better from there, but life isn't that simple. The next few weeks were a blur of arguments and tension. Victoria tried to make things right between us, but the trust was broken. I kept replaying that moment in my head, wondering how the hell we had gotten to this point. I loved her, but I couldn't shake the image of her with that other guy. It ate away at me, poisoning everything. Yes, I want to say that, looking ahead a bit, the affair wasn't even the most shocking news I got. Life has a twisted sense of humor, and it had more surprises in store for me. But let me take you through it. one step at a time. So I drove away from my wife's parents' house thinking that, well, I have a son to raise, and I need to ensure he grows up to be a good person. I can't just abandon my son. You might think I'm not upset, but I am. You can't even imagine how devastated I am. All my plans are shattered, and all because she had to sleep with some loser. Every dream I had of our future, of raising our child together, was gone. I felt like I was in a fucking nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I thought I needed to relax a bit, so I took my guys, and we went to the capital to blow off some steam. We hit up every bar, every club, and we didn't hold back. We drank like there was no tomorrow, danced with every girl we saw, and I lost myself in the chaos. I've never been with so many girls in my life. It was wild, reckless, and exactly what I needed to forget about my screwed-up life for a while. We partied till we couldn't stand, and for a few nights, I felt free. No worries, no betrayal, just pure, unadulterated fun. Then, I took the opportunity to spend a month at one of the naval bases. About 2 weeks in, I see on Instagram that my wife, who I haven't divorced yet, announced she's getting married to that moron she was with when I arrived. It was absurd. I called her and she said, "Weren't you invited?" It was completely insane how her parents had brainwashed her. They'd convinced her that I was the bad guy, that this other dude was her knight in shining armor. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. I decided to wait until the baby was born so I could take him away from that nut job and then get a divorce. I wasn't going to let my kid be raised in that toxic environment. I had to be patient, though. As much as I wanted to storm in and take my child, I knew I had to play it smart. 5 or more months passed, and during that time, I was at sea, occasionally visiting family. Then I got a call saying the baby was born, and it was a healthy girl. I almost cried in front of my crew. It was one of the happiest days of my life. A girl. I had a daughter. The news hit me like a ton of bricks, but in the best way possible. Suddenly, everything felt a little brighter. I visited them about a week later. She showed me the baby and I thought, how could this even be? I brought a new life into the world. It really felt like a miracle. Her lover was there too, whom I promised my wife I wouldn't hit. I told her I wanted to take the baby with me. My parents would help raise her, but she could visit. I didn't want my daughter to be raised by a whore. Right after I said that, a conflict erupted. This Brit told me to leave or else, so I asked, or else what? He swung at me, but I immediately hit him in the jaw and then the nose. Blood splattered, and he went down hard. Victoria screamed, the baby started crying, and her parents rushed in. It was chaos. Her father started yelling at me, saying I was a brute, that I had no right to take the child. I stood my ground, blood on my hands, adrenaline pumping through my veins. After that, I went outside to think over everything that had happened, hoping it would end well. I also wondered how I ended up being the outsider here. My wife was the one who cheated, yet I was the villain in their eyes. I felt like I was in some twisted reality where right and wrong didn't matter. I started preparing for court because she said she wouldn't give me anything. I knew it was going to be a brutal battle, but I was ready to fight. I had to protect my daughter, make sure she grew up knowing she was loved and cared for. I couldn't let her be raised by those people. They had no respect for me, no respect for what I stood for. They saw me as some disposable American soldier, but I was more than that. I was her father. Hi, everyone. After my first post on Reddit, I got in touch with a girl who had also been cheated on. It turned out she was from England, not far from where I am. We agreed to meet up. By the way, hello, I know you're reading this. Yeah, this one's for you. She was a very authentic, beautiful English girl with blue eyes, resembling Rosamund Mary Ellen Pike. If you don't know, she's an actress from England. Picture that kind of elegance and beauty. Elizabeth has this way about her, a grace that's both calming and captivating. When I first saw her, I couldn't believe my luck. Here was this stunning woman, and she actually wanted to meet me. It felt like the universe was finally cutting me some slack after all the bullshit I'd been through. We've been dating for over a month now, and I can say she's the person I've been looking for. The funniest thing about all this is that, remember I wrote that I went on Tinder and found 3 girls? Well, she was one of them. She told me she met the guy who cheated on her there, around the same time I was dating my wife. Imagine if I had chosen this girl right away, the one I'm currently in a relationship with. Let's call her Elizabeth. It's crazy how life works, right? Sometimes you miss the mark, but fate has a way of bringing things back around. So I met up with Victoria to talk. We started discussing how we would divide our property. The worst part of this situation is that my parents gave us a house in Texas, and due to bureaucratic issues, we decided to put the house in my wife's name. Who could have known she would start jumping on another guy's dick? Seriously, it's like the universe was fucking with me. We were talking in a cafe and I told her, let's split everything as it was before we met. But damn, she didn't agree because the child would be with her, and she needs somewhere to live with her lover. She plans to move into the house my parents gave us. Can you believe that shit? The nerve of some people. Here I was trying to be civil, and she was planning to shack up with her new guy in my family's house. And then the conflict started. She began yelling and scratching me. Then she said, "It's not your daughter." I was like, "What did you just say? Take your words back." I started shouting, "What the hell?" But she cried and left. I tried to stop her, but she immediately started screaming like crazy. Everyone was looking at us like we were some insane couple, although at least I wasn't. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Her words echoed in my head over and over. Not my daughter? What kind of sick joke was this? I couldn't sleep all night thinking, how is she not my child? I literally couldn't imagine life without her. Guys, I'm in complete despair. Every dream I'd had, every plan for the future, shattered in an instant. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which I had answers to. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I spent a whole week trying to meet with my wife. She avoided me like the plague. I'd show up at her place, and she'd be conveniently out. I'd call her, and she'd never pick up. It was like she vanished into thin air whenever I was around. If it weren't for my nightly outings around the city with Elizabeth, I would have gone mad. I want to thank her and say, if you're reading this, know that I love you. Elizabeth was my rock during those dark times. We'd walk the streets, talk about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I could forget the shitstorm my life had become. One night, we found this little pub tucked away in a corner of the city. It was quiet, cozy, and felt like a safe haven. We'd sit there for hours, sipping on pints and just being with each other. Elizabeth would listen as I poured out my frustrations, my fears, and my heartbreak. She never judged, never tried to fix me. She was just there, and that was enough. The days blurred together. Every waking moment was consumed by thoughts of my daughter, of the betrayal, of the looming court battle. I knew I had to pull myself together, to be strong for my little girl, but it was fucking hard. Elizabeth kept me grounded, reminding me of the good in life, the potential for happiness, even amidst all the chaos. Then one evening, as we were walking back from the pub, Elizabeth turned to me and said, "You know, Jack, you deserve better than this, better than her, better than all this pain. You're a good man, and you deserve to be happy." Her words hit me hard. I realized she was right. I couldn't keep drowning in this sea of misery. I had to fight, not just for my daughter, but for myself. So the court date came up, and I thought that if I didn't manage to get a DNA test done in time, I would mention my suspicions in court that the child might not be mine, although I don't believe it deep down. It was a desperate move, but fuck, I was running out of options. I needed something to turn this nightmare around, and that suspicion was my last card to play. The thought of that little girl not being mine tore me apart, but I had to consider every possibility. At that moment, I was supposed to be at sea, probably somewhere near Hawaii, but I requested leave for an important reason. My court date was approaching. The Navy wasn't thrilled about it, but they understood. It was a big deal, and they granted me the time off. So, instead of cruising through the Pacific, I found myself preparing for a legal battle that would determine my future. Elizabeth suggested we take a trip to Scotland before the court date to clear my head. Scotland, she said, was a place of beauty and peace. We rented a car and drove through the rolling hills and breathtaking landscapes. The people there were incredible, with their thick accents and warm smiles. We stayed at this cozy little inn in the Highlands, where the owner, a burly Scotsman named Angus, treated us like family. One night, he invited us to a local cailleadh, a traditional Scottish dance party. We drank whiskey, danced, and laughed like we hadn't in ages. One day, we stopped at a small village pub. The locals were curious about us, and once they found out we were visiting from England, they were even more intrigued. They shared stories, bought us drinks, and made us feel welcome. But not everyone was so friendly. In another pub, a grumpy old man gave us the cold shoulder, muttering something about bloody English tourists. It was a minor hiccup in an otherwise perfect trip. So if you ever visit Britain, I recommend visiting Scotland, a wonderful place with amazing nature and mostly kind-hearted people. The day before the court date was a tense one. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Elizabeth tried to comfort me, reminding me that no matter what happened, we'd get through it together. Her words were a balm to my frazzled nerves, but the anxiety lingered. Then came the day of the court. The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and stern-faced officials. My lawyer and I went over our strategy one last time, and I steeled myself for what was to come. Victoria sat across from me, looking defiant and cold. Her lawyer started by painting me as an unfit father, a soldier who was never around, always putting his duty before his family. When it was my turn, I laid it all out: the affair, the betrayal, my desire to be a good father. And then I dropped the bombshell: my fear that the child might not be mine. Victoria erupted, yelling that I was insane, that the baby was definitely mine, but her outburst only made her look unhinged. I couldn't listen to her anymore. She just infuriated me, and I wanted never to see her again. The judge decided to postpone the court to allow time for a DNA test. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The court was postponed, and now I'm waiting for the results. In the meantime, I've been traveling around Britain with Elizabeth, and I must say it's been a wonderful time. Just me, my car, and Elizabeth. We've explored the countryside, visited ancient castles, and even spent a night in a haunted hotel. It's been an incredible distraction from the hell of my legal battles. One weekend we drove up to the Lake District. The beauty of the place was surreal. We hiked through lush green valleys and along crystal-clear lakes. At one point, we found a secluded spot by a waterfall and had a picnic. For a few hours, it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. No court cases, no betrayals, just the sound of the water and the feeling of Elizabeth's hand in mine. We've also hit up some of the bigger cities. In Edinburgh, we toured the ancient streets, visited the castle, and even caught a show at the famous Edinburgh Festival Fringe. The city's energy was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. London was another highlight. We did all the touristy things: Big Ben, the Tower of London, Buckingham Palace. But the best part was the nights out. We hit up some incredible bars and clubs, danced until the early hours, and stumbled back to our hotel room, laughing and holding each other. Elizabeth has been my anchor through all of this. She's strong, supportive, and everything I never knew I needed. Every day with her feels like a gift, a chance to rebuild my life from the ground up. We've talked about the future, about what might happen if the DNA test confirms my worst fears. And while the thought terrifies me, I know I won't face it alone. Now it's a waiting game. The DNA results will take some time. And until then, we're making the most of our days. We're planning a trip to Wales next, to see the stunning coastlines, and maybe do some surfing. Elizabeth is teaching me how to let go, how to live in the moment, and how to find joy, even in the darkest of times. After all these travels, I got a call and was told that in a week, there would be a court hearing where the judge would open the envelope with the DNA test results. It felt like something out of a movie, I thought, but my hands started shaking a bit from the anxiety because this is my daughter. This little girl who I've pictured teaching to ride a bike, watching grow up, calling me dad. The thought that she might not be mine was tearing me apart. 2 days before the court, I couldn't sleep. The anxiety was eating me alive. Elizabeth tried her best to comfort me, but it was no use. My mind kept racing through all the possible outcomes. What if she wasn't mine? What if she was? How would I handle either scenario? I spent those days in a haze, wandering around, barely able to focus on anything. Every time I looked at Elizabeth, I saw a glimpse of hope, a reminder that no matter what happened, I had someone who cared about me deeply. The day before the court, my parents arrived from America. Seeing them brought a mix of comfort and sadness. They were so supportive, so eager to help me through this. But I could see the worry in their eyes. They'd flown all this way to stand by me, and I felt a pang of guilt for dragging them into this mess. We spent the evening together, trying to keep the conversation light, reminiscing about better times. My dad told Old Navy stories, and my mom tried to distract me with tales of home. An hour before the court, I introduced my parents to Elizabeth. It was a surreal moment. Here we were, all these important people in my life, brought together by this fucked up situation. My mom took an instant liking to Elizabeth, and my dad gave her a nod of approval. It was a small relief amidst the storm. We grabbed a quick coffee, and I could see my parents were trying to keep me calm, but my nerves were shot. The start of the court was intense. The room was cold, sterile, filled with tension. Victoria was there, looking defiant as ever, her parents flanking her like some kind of twisted royal guard. Elizabeth sat beside me, holding my hand under the table. My lawyer laid out our case, and Victoria's lawyer did the same. It was a lot of legal bullshit back and forth, but all I could think about was that envelope. It sat on the judge's desk, a small, innocuous-looking thing that held the answer to my future. Then came the moment of truth. The judge opened the envelope and read the DNA test results. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The judge looked up and said, "Mr. Smith, the test results showed that you are not the biological father." Victoria started crying and yelling that it wasn't true, while I just sat there with a stone-cold face. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The room seemed to spin and I couldn't focus on anything. People were telling me they sympathized with me, but I didn't want to hear anything. I just wanted this day to be over as quickly as possible. Their words felt hollow, meaningless. I didn't need their pity. I needed this nightmare to end. Elizabeth squeezed my hand, trying to offer comfort, but I felt numb. The judge's words kept echoing in my head. Not the biological father. The court also decided that everything that was mine before the marriage remains mine, including the house my parents gave us, and even the car that was technically my wife's. In the end, I ended up with more than I expected. About 65% of our assets remained with me. It was a hollow victory. I got the house, the car, most of the money, but I lost my daughter. Or rather, I lost the illusion of her. She wasn't mine, never had been, and that reality was hard to swallow. A week after coming to terms with everything, I sailed out to sea. I needed the distance, the isolation, to process everything that had happened. The open ocean has a way of putting things into perspective. I was off the coast of Israel when the attack happened. I'm sitting on the ship now, writing this, thinking that I might not get another chance to post anything. The world is a volatile place, and sometimes it feels like it's all on the brink of chaos. I hope everything turns out okay, and that World War III doesn't happen. Thanks to everyone who supported me. Elizabeth and I have talked a lot about the future. She's been my rock through all of this, and I can't imagine my life without her now. We're planning to move back to the States once my deployment is over. Maybe start fresh in Texas, build a new life together. It's scary and exciting all at once. The road ahead is uncertain, but I know we'll face it together. ## part 7, without the ending. A year later, life took a turn I never saw coming. After everything I'd been through, I found myself standing in a delivery room, tears streaming down my face as I held not one but two tiny bundles of joy. Elizabeth and I had twin boys, and I was overjoyed. I thanked God so much that everything turned out this way. Just imagine how my life would have unfolded if I hadn't decided to write about this on Reddit. It's crazy how a simple post on the internet can change your life forever. My ex, Victoria, ended up divorcing that guy. He started beating her. The dumbest part is that she chose this wimp when she had me. Yes, I'm very modest. She traded a loyal, loving husband for a piece of shit who couldn't even keep his hands to himself. It's poetic justice in a fucked up way. Sometimes, I wonder what she's thinking now, seeing me happy, successful, and moving on without her. Over the past year, I've been promoted twice in rank. I won't write here what my rank is, just in case. Let's just say things are looking pretty damn good on the career front. The hard work, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, it's all paying off. And I have Elizabeth by my side, supporting me through it all. She's been my rock, my confidant, my everything. Elizabeth and I visited New Zealand recently. It was an incredible trip. We stayed in this quaint little cottage near a sheep farm. One morning I decided to make breakfast while Elizabeth was still sleeping. I went outside to gather some fresh eggs from the farm, but those damn chickens had other plans. They chased me around the yard, clucking and pecking like they were defending Fort Knox. Elizabeth woke up to the sight of me sprinting around, being harassed by a flock of angry birds. We laughed about it for days. Another time, we were hiking through one of New Zealand's stunning national parks. We came across a group of tourists who were utterly lost. They had a map, but no clue how to read it. Elizabeth, ever the helpful one, offered to guide them back to the trailhead. Turns out, they were from a country where English wasn't the first language, and there was a massive language barrier. Watching Elizabeth try to communicate through exaggerated gestures and broken phrases was hilarious. By the end of it, we'd formed a little caravan of confused but grateful tourists. If you've read my story up to this point, be sure to write what you think about it. Maybe I messed up somewhere that made her cheat on me, or maybe there was nothing I could do to influence her, except maybe keep her at home. Just kidding. I mean, seriously, what the hell could I have done differently? It's like a puzzle where some pieces just don't fit no matter how hard you try. Maybe it was always going to end this way, and I just had to live through the pain to get to the good part. Reflections I've had over this past year? Well, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life doesn't give a fuck about your plans. You can map out every detail, every step, but it'll still find a way to throw a wrench in the works. You've got to be flexible, adaptable, and sometimes you've just got to roll with the punches. Being in the military, you'd think I'd be used to that, but life outside the service has its own set of challenges. Another thing, people will surprise you, both in good ways and bad. Victoria's betrayal was a shock, a kick in the gut I never saw coming. But Elizabeth's love, her unwavering support, that was a surprise too. A good one. It's easy to get cynical, to expect the worst from people, but then someone comes along and reminds you that there's still good in the world. Thanks to everyone for reading and for your advice. Your support has been invaluable. To those of you who reached out, who shared your own stories of heartbreak and recovery, thank you. You helped me see that I wasn't alone, that there was a way forward, even when everything seemed dark.